Hello, my name is Paul Zablocki, Development Gifts Officer at Canisius High School, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to another episode of Conversations with Canisius, the web series where we connect alumni from around the world with the classrooms on Delaware Avenue. Today, my guest is Dr. Renier Brentjens from the class of 1985. Doctor, thank you for taking the time this afternoon to join us, and why don't you start by giving us an opportunity to talk about your journey since you left Canisius High School.
So, Paul, I want to thank you for this opportunity, and I will just give you some history. I was originally born in the Netherlands, which is the country where St. Peter Canisius was born, which I had to remind the Jesuit fathers of when I got there, and moved to Buffalo and grew up in Buffalo since I was 10. Going to Canisius High School was one of the first really important academic moves that I made as a young man. And after graduating from Canisius, I spent 4 years down in North Carolina at Davidson College, which is a Presbyterian school, but that's okay now. And that's also the school where Steph Curry went to.
Yeah.
I graduated from Davidson in 1989 and then moved back to Buffalo, where I joined the MD Ph.D. program at State University of New York at Buffalo. During my PhD years, I learned about immunology and I learned about microbiology. And I completed both degrees in 1996. I planned to study internal medicine, and so in 1996, I moved to New Haven, Connecticut, where I was a intern and resident at Yale New Haven Hospital. And after 2 years there, I decided to specialize in oncology, and so I moved to Memorial Sloan Kettering in 1998 to start my oncology fellowship, and I've stayed there ever since. My progress initially was to learn about how to treat patients with oncology, but having a scientific background, I wanted to look into utilizing genetic ways or gene therapeutic ways of treating patients with cancer. And I was able to combine that with my background in immunology. And so I started working in my second year there in the laboratory of Michel Sadelain on re-educating your immune cells to recognize cancer cells. And the cells that we looked at were called T cells, and those cells can be taken out of the patient, and in the laboratory they can be genetically engineered, or you can add a gene there that will allow these cells, when they're given back to the patient, now to recognize proteins on the surface of their cancer cells. That was we call them chimeric antigen receptor T cells, or CAR T cells. And that was basically a technology that was in its infancy when I had just gotten there, and when I was still a fellow at Memorial. And over the intervening 20 years, I think just recently, the third type of CAR T cell has been FDA approved. And I started utilizing this technology to help patients that have leukemias, because I'm a doctor on the leukemia service. And so we started targeting patients with acute leukemias that usually have a pretty bad prognosis, especially adults. And fortunately, that technology is now expanded to a lot of patients with bad types of lymphoma. And we expect that the technology that we developed in our lab to now also be suitable for soon to be FDA approved for treating patients with multiple myeloma. And so with both the scientific as well as the medical background, I have the luxury of being able to have my own leukemia patients that I take care of, as well as run my own lab where we develop these type of immune therapy-based technologies to hopefully make the outcomes of patients with cancer better.
It's a remarkable, remarkable that those roads, that you're driving down both of those roads at one time, because that's usually not always the case. Is that right?
Yeah, so it's called translational medicine, but it's really the best of both worlds. You actually get to create something in the laboratory, and then it's almost bizarrely you get to infuse what you created in the laboratory into the patients. And then if you're lucky, and you do good science, those patients actually get better. And so um, uh, the downside to it is that you spend an awful long time in school. And
Well, tell me a little bit. That's a really good segue. Tell me a little bit about how Canisius prepared you to spend so much time in further school.
well, I guess I always say this to anyone that cares to listen. There's two types of men in this country: those that were trained by Jesuits and those that weren't. And I've always noticed uh, a couple of things. Is a that there is a very strong identity if you've gone to a Jesuit school. Any two people that realize that the other also went to a Jesuit school will talk about everything. And for those of you listening, Jug is in every Jesuit school that I know of. So there's a certain commonality. But the great thing is that at the age that I was in high school, you have to transform the way you think about learning. I mean, not all learning is good learning or fun learning, but you have to be able to appreciate knowledge for the sake of knowledge. And if you manage that, then all at once the courses that you take become like watching, binge watching, the History Channel or something like that. I know it sounds a little bit nerdy to say that you should enjoy knowledge for the sake of knowledge, but one of the things that I think I really learned at Canisius and continued to learn when I moved on to college, but I think the seed was sown at Canisius is the fact that knowledge is in fact power, and you never know when knowing something will be of benefit. I remember that we used to complain about having to take physics as part of your pre-medical school training, and when would you ever use physics in medicine? But when I interact with patients, there's a relationship there that is very awkward at points and very personal. You're invading someone's space. More times than not, you're asking them to first take off their clothes.
Right.
And if you have a background knowledge and you find out where the patient's from, if they're Greek, you tell them about what you learned in high school about Greek culture, etc. There's an immense value to being able to be a human being and being able to communicate. And it's often a shame that these days that type of education is becoming less and less emphasized, because it's so important for just your ability to communicate. And whether that is as a lawyer or whether that is as a physician with a patient, it is so incredibly important, because you can put people so much more at ease if you can have a dialogue with them, if you can share interests, if you know something about where they're from or what they do, etc. And again, it's being given that sense that guys, we're not just doing this for the test, we're doing this for your life. And I think that um, more so than others, when I encounter other graduates from Jesuit high schools and colleges, they share that enthusiasm of knowledge. And I can't but help think that that's not a coincidence.
I agree. I feel like there's an emphasis in society today to understand what the return on investment is for every class, every subject, every assignment. And part of it is, like you said, it's the process of the learning and the excitement of knowledge that really should be the priority. So I appreciate that insight. Tell
Well,
me
I
a little
mean,
bit about
well,
how.
just quickly, just to illustrate that a little further, I mean, I graduated from college with a degree in history.
Yeah.
I took all the prerequisites to go to medical school, but I thought it was that desire to know stuff, carried through college.
As someone with a history degree, I can sincerely appreciate that. I did not do all the prerequisites for medical school. Tell me a little bit about Ignatian education. You've referenced the importance and the uniqueness of individuals who have been educated by the Jesuits. And at the core of any Jesuit education is, the teachings and the philosophy that Ignatius, the founder of the society, established for the entire order. So, how has your Ignatian formation and being Ignatian educated affected your life currently?
I think that first and foremost, if I think back to my days at Canisius, discipline. I think that it is so immensely important to have discipline, and that is a lesson that carries through to today. I mean, if you look to my left, there's a stack of papers that require my discipline to get through. Um, Discipline, I think, was one of the traits and one of the lessons that was learned. Just structured, and the ability to and to have respect for those that teach you. And I think that those are traits that may not be shared by 100% of students and at Ignatian schools, but it's certainly by a decent 95%, I would say. And my sons went to a Jesuit school in Jersey City here, St. Peter's Prep, and the same thing. It is the respect that the students have for their elders and for society. It's pervasive, and that's an important lesson to learn. I mean, rebellion usually doesn't work well. I mean, it's really being disciplined and being an individual, certainly, but doing what you do in the context of discipline.
That's an interesting perspective. That's a new one, a new answer for this web series. But I think that reflects, very clearly back to the Jesuits. I mean, if you look at their lives and how they, because to be obedient is also to be disciplined, and they certainly have a devotion to the order, and no, that's a very unique perspective. Thank you for sharing that. This web series is associated with our Center for Global Learning initiative, and I know that your research and your practice has taken you all over the world, but also you interact with a global cancer research community. Can you talk about the complexities of that work, and how you exist and interact with an international work group?
So that's a very good question. Let me start off by saying one of the unexpected perks of the field that I work in, and with the work that we've done, is that there are a multitude of invitations to give talks at hospitals, at universities. I had the opportunity several years ago to give a grand rounds lecture at the University of Leiden, which was the university where my mom went to medical school.
Wow.
But I've also had the opportunity to travel to Korea, to Japan, very interestingly to China, as well as numerous other places, which was a privilege. But as you pointed out, it gives you the opportunity to communicate with investigators from all over the world. And that too requires a degree of patience, because different cultures communicate in different ways. And so you actually learn the different ways of interacting with investigators that is at least partly geographically dependent. And so so the interactions you have with your colleagues in China will be different than that you would have with your European colleagues, or even remarkably very distinct from how you interact with scientists in Japan. And when I say interact, there is a level of humility that's required, and also being able to read what the deeper meanings are of what you're being told by your hosts when you're there. That having been said, I've established extremely gratifying relationships with laboratories outside of the United States, and what I found is that upon first encounter, um, um, if you work at it and continue that relationship, you find that not only do you visit those foreign laboratories more often, but you also find that it can be very productive as far as communicating and exporting your technology to other countries.
As we wrap up our conversation today, you articulated your high school education, perspectives of your high school education very well. We have 16, 17, 18-year-old young men who are sitting at the same desks that you and I sat at, and they're about to go into a world that is in an inflection point and in one of the most unique and difficult times in recent memory. Could you offer one or two perspectives or pieces of advice that you would like to share with them as they prepare to enter into college and eventually a career?
Yeah, so I would have two pieces of advice, which may or may not be universally applicable. The first is take your time. You, at your age, you want to define yourself as soon as possible, and that sometimes works out wonderfully, but other times it's better to really take your time to find out what it is that you want to do, and sometimes when you find that, you realize that the road is a bit longer than you would have ideally wanted, because everything at your age is in 4-year gaps, four
Right.
years of high school, 4 years of college, 3 years of law school, what have you. But taking that extra step, getting that extra accreditation, um, uh, pays off immeasurably. I can honestly tell you that there were times when I was mired in my Ph.D. work where I just wanted to get done. I just wanted to be a doctor. And that's again where patience and discipline paid off. And the second piece of advice, which I think is probably the most important piece of advice, and I apologize, it's a little cliche, but do something that you like doing. It is extremely difficult to do something well that you don't like doing. Um, my wife's an anesthesiologist, and my wife and I have this running joke that she has a job and I have a hobby. And what that means is that the work that I do, even though maybe not all of it, but a majority of it gives me great pleasure and satisfaction. And that's the only way that you're really going to excel at what you choose to do. So make sure that when you make that decision, is this something I want to do, or is this something I feel I have to do? Wanting to do it is incredibly important. And as my son often tells me, if you enjoy what you're doing, you'll never work a day in your life. And that's the cliche, but I can't tell you how true that actually is. I mean, looking back from 1985 when I graduated to now, I've been fortunate. I mean, you have to find enjoyment, and if it seems like a job, maybe it's not the thing for you.
Doctor, I want to thank you for your time this afternoon and for sharing your experience and your wisdom with our students and with our Canisius community. It's greatly appreciated, and I wish you and your patients all of the best of luck in your research and in their treatments. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Go Crusaders.